She thought she had just lost everything. Her job, her future, her only chance to protect her child. But when she opened that forbidden door, she found something no one could have imagined. A powerful millionaire, the kind of man who fires people without blinking, was sitting there, asleep, with her little girl in his arms like she was the most precious thing in the world. What happened next didn't just change her life. It changed his too, forever. If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances touch your heart, make sure you subscribe, because this one will stay with you. Sarah had always believed that life gave people exactly what they could survive. Nothing more, nothing less. But that morning, life felt cruel. The moment she pushed open the utility closet door and saw the empty space, something inside her broke. Her breath caught. Her hands froze. The small bundle of cleaning cloth she had been holding slipped from her fingers and dropped to the marble floor, the sound echoing far louder than it should have in the silence of the massive house. "Violet?" she whispered. No answer. Her heart skipped once, then began pounding violently. "Violet!" she called again, louder this time. Still nothing. And in that silence, fear took over. This wasn't just any house. This was the Maxwell estate, a place so large, so polished, so perfect, it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum where mistakes didn't belong. And Sarah was not someone who could afford mistakes. She was a poor single mother barely holding her life together. This job wasn't just important. It was survival. Her mind raced. 10 minutes. She had left Violet there for just 10 minutes. A quiet corner. Crayons. A sketchbook. Safe. Or at least, she thought it was safe. Now her 3-year-old daughter was gone. Sarah's chest tightened as she rushed down the hallway, her shoes clicking rapidly against the expensive wooden floors. "Violet!" she called again, her voice cracking now. She checked behind the large leather sofa. Nothing. She looked under the glass dining table that overlooked the city skyline. Nothing. Her breathing turned uneven, almost painful. In her mind, images flashed rapidly. Violet touching something expensive, breaking it, getting hurt, or worse. And then another image. Mr. Richard Maxwell. Cold eyes. Sharp voice. Zero tolerance. "I do not allow mistakes in my home." Those words echoed in her head like a warning she had ignored. If she lost this job, there would be no backup, no savings, no family. Just the harsh streets of a city that didn't care whether a mother and her child survived or not. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to keep moving. Up the stairs. One step after another. Faster. Her heart was no longer just beating. It was shaking her entire body. She checked the guest rooms. Empty. The bathrooms. Empty. The long hallway stretched endlessly in front of her, lined with expensive paintings she didn't even dare look at on normal days. But now, she couldn't see anything clearly. Fear was blurring everything. "Please, God," she whispered under her breath, something she hadn't done in a long time. Just let her be safe. Because at that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the job. Not the rules. Not the consequences. Only her daughter. Then, her eyes stopped. At the very end of the hallway, there was one door. Closed. Heavy. Silent. And forbidden. Mr. Maxwell's private study. The one place she had been clearly told never to enter. Ever. Her stomach dropped. A cold realization settled in. What if Violet had wandered inside? Sarah swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry, almost burning. Every instinct told her not to touch that door. But something stronger pushed her forward. A mother's fear. A mother's love. Step by step, she walked toward it. Her heartbeat grew louder with each step. Her hand trembled as it reached for the handle. If Violet was inside, and something had gone wrong, this wouldn't just be about losing a job anymore. This would be something far worse. She closed her eyes for a brief second, took a shaky breath, and slowly turned the handle. The door opened without a sound, and what she saw made her freeze completely. Her entire body went still. Her breath stopped, because inside that room, nothing was broken. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was wrong. Instead, Mr. Richard Maxwell, the powerful, distant, untouchable millionaire, was sitting in his chair, asleep, and resting peacefully against his chest was Violet, curled up like she had found the safest place in the world. Sarah couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't even breathe properly. The man who never smiled looked calm, gentle, human. Her little girl's tiny hand was gripping his expensive tie, as if she refused to let go. And he hadn't pushed her away, hadn't called security, hadn't reacted at all. He was just there, holding her, like she belonged. And in that quiet, unbelievable moment, everything Sarah thought she knew about this man started to change. Then suddenly, he moved, just slightly, and his eyes slowly opened. And in the next second, he looked straight at Sarah. His eyes met hers, and for a split second, Sarah felt her entire world collapse. This was it. This was the moment everything ended. Her job, her stability, her fragile hope of giving Violet a better life. She stepped forward quickly, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry, Mr. Maxwell. I didn't know she came in here. I was looking for her everywhere. Her words rushed out, almost tripping over each other as panic tightened her chest. She clasped her hands together tightly, as if holding herself together. I promise it won't happen again. I'll take her right now. But he didn't interrupt her harshly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even move the way she expected. Instead, Richard Maxwell stayed still, his gaze drifting down for a moment to the small girl sleeping peacefully against him. There was something in his eyes. Not anger. Not frustration. Something softer. Something unfamiliar. She walked in on her own, he said quietly. His voice was low, calm, almost careful, like he didn't want to wake her. Sarah blinked, confused. I understand, sir, but I should have been watching her more carefully. It won't happen again. She stepped closer, slowly reaching her arms forward, ready to take Violet. But before she could touch her, he shifted slightly, not to hand her over, but to adjust the little girl more comfortably against his chest. Sarah froze again. Her hands hovered in the air, unsure, unwelcome, confused. She was organizing my desk, he continued, his tone almost thoughtful now. Paper clips, into a little pile. Very serious about it. For a brief moment, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close enough that Sarah felt her heart skip. She talked a lot, he added, almost to himself, about colors, and how yellow is her favorite. Sarah swallowed hard, emotion rising unexpectedly in her chest. That sounded exactly like Violet. Curious, talkative, fearless. Everything Sarah had always loved and feared at the same time. She climbed up here, he said, glancing down again, like she knew she could. Silence followed. A long, strange silence that didn't feel cold anymore. It felt heavy, but not in a bad way, like something unspoken was settling between them. I'll take her now, Sarah whispered gently, trying again. This time, he shook his head. Slowly. No. The word wasn't sharp. It wasn't controlling. It was certain. Sarah's breath caught. I don't want to disturb her, he added, his hand resting lightly near Violet's back. She's comfortable. Comfortable. That word hit Sarah harder than anything else. Because comfort was something her daughter rarely had. Not in their small apartment. Not in a life where every dollar mattered. Not in a world where she had to sit quietly in corners while her mother worked. And yet, here she was, sleeping peacefully, in the arms of a man who owned more than Sarah could ever dream of. The contrast made her chest ache. I didn't mean for her to bother you, Sarah said softly, her voice carrying both apology and something deeper, something more vulnerable. She didn't. His answer came quickly this time. Firm. Clear. And for the first time, he looked directly at Sarah again. Not through her. Not past her. At her. Really seeing her. The exhaustion in his face was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Curiosity. What's her name? He asked. Sarah hesitated for just a second, then answered, quietly but with pride. Violet. He repeated it slowly. Violet. As if the name carried weight. As if it meant something. As if he wanted to remember it. Another silence filled the room, but this one felt warmer. The kind of silence that doesn't push people apart, but pulls them closer without words. Then he exhaled deeply, a long breath that seemed to come from somewhere far inside him. It's been a long time, he said. Sarah frowned slightly. Sir. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the child resting against him. Since I felt this. There was no arrogance in his voice. No control. Just honesty. Raw and unexpected. Sarah's heart softened despite herself. What do you mean? She asked gently. He paused, then answered in a quiet voice that almost didn't sound like the man she had met days ago. Peace. That word lingered in the air. And suddenly, everything shifted. Sarah saw it now. Not just the wealth. Not just the power. But the emptiness behind it. This house wasn't a home. It was silence. Control. Distance. A place where nothing moved unless it had to. And this man had been living inside that silence for a long time. Violet stirred slightly in her sleep, her fingers tightening around his tie. Instinctively, he adjusted his hold again. Careful. Gentle. Like he was afraid to wake her. Or maybe afraid to lose that feeling. Sarah watched him closely now, her fear slowly giving way to something else. Understanding. I should get back to work, she said quietly after a moment, unsure how to exist in this new space between them. There's still a lot to finish before the evening. He didn't respond immediately. Just kept watching Violet. Then finally, it can wait. 2 simple words. But they carried a weight that surprised even him. Sarah noticed it. You always say time matters, she said softly, almost without thinking. That every minute counts. A faint, tired expression crossed his face. I do, he admitted. Then after a pause. I just never understood what those minutes were for. That sentence settled deep inside her. Because she understood. More than he knew. Every minute of her life had always been about survival. For him, maybe it had always been about control. Until now. Until a small child walked into his world without permission, and changed something inside him. How old is she? He asked quietly. 3. He nodded slowly, and something in his expression shifted again. Something heavier this time. My sister was that age, he said. Sarah stayed still, listening. When our parents died. The words landed softly, but carried a deep weight. I was 17, he continued. Everything changed in one day. His voice remained steady, but the pain underneath it was clear. I had to take care of her. Make sure she never struggled. Never felt what I felt. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest, because she knew that kind of responsibility, that kind of sacrifice. And now? She asked gently. He gave a small, distant look. She has her own life. A pause. And I have mine. The way he said it didn't sound like success. It sounded like distance. Like something had been lost along the way. And suddenly, Sarah didn't see a powerful millionaire anymore. She saw a man who had spent his life building everything, except the one thing that mattered. Violet shifted again, her head resting more firmly against his chest. And without thinking, he held her closer. Just slightly. And in that small, quiet movement, something unspoken began to grow between them. Something neither of them fully understood yet, but both could feel. And Sarah realized this moment was only the beginning. Sarah stood there longer than she should have. Something in her told her to leave, to return to her work, to restore the invisible line that had always separated her world from his. But her feet didn't move, because for the first time since she stepped into this house, she didn't feel like she was standing in the presence of a man she feared. She felt like she was standing in front of someone, human, and that scared her in a different way. "I'll be in the kitchen," she said quietly, almost as if asking permission. Richard gave a slight nod, but his attention never fully left Violet. Sarah turned slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the door as she stepped out into the hallway. The moment the door closed behind her, she exhaled, a long breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Her legs felt weak, her heart still unsettled, but not from fear anymore. From something else she couldn't quite name. She leaned against the wall for just a second, closing her eyes. That image. Her daughter, safe, peaceful, held in the arms of a man she had only known as cold and distant. It didn't make sense, but it felt real. Too real. And somehow, it stayed with her as she walked back down the hallway, each step slower than before. The house didn't feel as heavy anymore. Still quiet. Still large. But not as empty. When she reached the kitchen, she picked up where she had left off, her hands moving automatically as she wiped down the counters. But her mind was still in that room, still replaying every word, every look, every small, unexpected moment. "She didn't bother me." That line echoed softly in her thoughts. Her lips pressed together as emotion rose again. Because her whole life, people had been bothered. By her situation. By her child. Doors had closed quietly. Opportunities had slipped away politely. And she had learned to make herself small, invisible, so she wouldn't be a burden. So her daughter wouldn't be seen as one either. But today, for the first time, someone hadn't seen Violet as a problem. And that alone felt like something close to a miracle. Time passed, though she couldn't say how much. Minutes, maybe longer. The sound of soft footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. She turned slightly, and there he was, standing at the entrance of the kitchen, still holding Violet. But now she was awake, her small arms loosely wrapped around his neck, her sleepy eyes blinking slowly as she looked around. "Mommy," she murmured softly. Sarah's heart melted instantly. "I'm right here, baby," she said gently, stepping forward. Violet reached for her, but hesitated for just a second, glancing back at Richard. That small hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Not by Sarah, and not by him. Then she leaned into her mother, resting her head against her shoulder. Sarah held her tightly, pressing a soft kiss against her hair. "You scared me," she whispered. "I went to see the big room," Violet said softly, her voice still heavy with sleep. He has shiny things. Sarah let out a quiet breath, a mix of relief and lingering emotion. I know, sweetheart. Then silence. But it wasn't awkward. It was thoughtful. Richard stood there for a moment, watching them. There was something in his expression again. Something deeper. As if he was observing something he didn't fully understand, but didn't want to look away from. She's curious, he said finally. Sarah nodded. Too curious sometimes. There was a faint hint of a smile in her voice. She sees the world like it's meant to be explored. He leaned slightly against the doorway, his arms relaxed now. That's not a bad thing. No, Sarah agreed quietly. It's just harder when you don't have much room to explore. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Honest. Unfiltered. She immediately looked down, as if she had said too much. But he didn't react the way she expected. Instead, he seemed to absorb it. Understand it. I suppose I had too much room, he said after a moment, and still didn't know what to do with it. Sarah looked up at him. Their eyes met again. And this time, there was no fear. Just something steady. Something growing. Violet shifted slightly in her arms, now fully awake. Can I draw again? She asked softly. Sarah hesitated. Her instinct was to say no. To keep her close. To avoid any risk. But before she could answer, Richard spoke. She can use the study. Sarah froze. I don't think that's appropriate, she said carefully. That room is. Just a room, he interrupted gently. His tone wasn't dismissive. It was certain. She seemed to like it. Sarah tightened her hold on Violet slightly. She's still a child. I don't want her to disturb your work again. He shook his head. She didn't disturb anything. A pause. Then more quietly. She reminded me of something I forgot. That line settled deep between them, and Sarah felt it. The weight of it. The truth behind it. She looked at Violet, then back at him. And for the first time, she considered something she had never allowed herself to think. Maybe this place didn't have to feel so cold. Maybe her daughter didn't have to hide here. Maybe things could be different. But different meant risk. And risk was something she couldn't afford. Not with everything on the line. I'll think about it, she said softly. It wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a no either. And somehow he accepted that. A small nod. Nothing more. Then he turned slightly, as if to leave. But paused. Just for a second. Sarah. She looked at him again. Yes, sir. There was a brief silence. Like he was choosing his words carefully. Thank you. Her brows furrowed slightly. For what? He glanced at Violet, then back at her. For bringing her here. The words were simple, but they carried something deeper. Something real. And Sarah didn't know how to respond. Because no one had ever thanked her. For simply trying to survive. He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, holding her daughter, and questioning everything she thought she understood about this house, and about the man who lived in it, because something had shifted, quietly, unexpectedly, and she had a feeling. This was only the beginning of something far bigger than either of them were prepared for. Sarah stood in the quiet kitchen long after he disappeared from view. His words didn't leave with him. They stayed, lingering in the air, settling deep inside her chest. Thank you for bringing her here. No one had ever said something like that to her before. Not for being a mother. Not for struggling. not for doing whatever it took to keep her child close, even when the world made it difficult. Most people didn't see sacrifice. They saw inconvenience, responsibility, a burden. But he had seen something else, and that scared her more than his coldness ever did, because kindness had a way of breaking walls she had spent years building. "Mommy, can I go draw?" Violet asked softly, pulling her back to the moment. Sarah looked down at her. Those big, hopeful eyes, so full of life, so unaware of how fragile everything around them really was. She hesitated. Her instinct still whispered no. Keep things safe. Keep things controlled. But something inside her, something small, quiet, and growing, told her to let go. Just a little. "You can draw," she said gently. "But you stay where I can see you, okay?" Violet nodded quickly, a small smile spreading across her face. "Okay." She slid down from Sarah's arms and ran lightly toward the corner of the kitchen where her crayons and sketchbook were left earlier. Sarah watched her closely. Every movement, every step, as if her eyes alone could protect her. Then slowly, she returned to her work. But something had changed. Her movements weren't as tense anymore. Her breathing steadier. And every now and then, her gaze would drift toward the doorway, as if expecting him to appear again, as if part of her wanted him to. The rest of the day passed differently, subtly, quietly, but undeniably different. There was no sharp voice echoing through the halls, no cold instructions waiting for her, no sense of walking on invisible lines that she couldn't afford to cross. Instead, there was space, and something softer woven into it. At one point, as she moved through the hallway, she noticed the study door slightly open. Not closed, not locked, just open. She slowed her steps, only for a second, just enough to notice, then continued walking. But her heart felt that small detail more than she expected. That door had been a boundary, a line, and now it wasn't as firm as before. Later that afternoon, as sunlight stretched across the floors in long golden lines, Sarah found Violet sitting quietly, deeply focused on her drawing. "What are you making?" she asked, kneeling beside her. "A house," Violet said, her voice soft but proud. Sarah smiled faintly. "Looks beautiful." Violet nodded seriously. "It's big." Sarah let out a small breath. "Bigger than this one?" Violet paused, thinking, then shook her head. "No, but warmer." The answer caught Sarah off guard. Her fingers tightened slightly against her apron. Warmer. A child's word. Simple, but honest. Because even Violet could feel it. This place wasn't warm. Not yet. That evening, as the light faded and shadows began to settle into the corners of the house, Sarah gathered her things. Her body was tired, but her mind still restless, still turning over everything that had happened. She walked toward the entrance, holding Violet's small hand tightly. Every step felt heavier now, like she was leaving something unfinished behind. As she reached the door, she paused, just for a moment, and glanced back. The house stood quiet, still, but no longer empty in the same way. Then, footsteps. She turned, and saw him again. Richard stood a few feet away, his expression calm, but there was something unreadable behind it. "You're leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she replied softly. "My shift is over." A brief silence passed between them. Then he nodded. "Of course." Violet peeked from behind Sarah's side. "Bye," she said shyly. He looked at her, and something in his face softened instantly. "Goodbye, Violet." The way he said her name was different, Like it meant something now. Like it stayed with him. Violet smiled slightly, then hid again. Sarah adjusted her grip on her daughter's hand. "We'll be back tomorrow," she said, more out of habit than intention. But the moment the words left her mouth, they felt different. Not like a routine. Like a promise. He gave a small nod. "I'll be here." Simple words. But they carried weight. More than either of them expected. Sarah turned again, opening the door. The evening air greeted her, cool and quiet. She stepped outside. But something pulled at her. A feeling she couldn't ignore. She looked back one last time. And saw him still standing there. Watching. Not in a controlling way. Not distant. Just present. As if he wasn't ready for the moment to end either. Their eyes met again. And this time, neither of them looked away immediately. Because something had begun. Quietly. Unspoken. But real. And as Sarah walked away into the fading light, holding her daughter close, she couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow was going to be different. Not just another day, but the start of something neither of them had planned. And neither of them were ready to lose. That night didn't feel like any other night. Sarah sat on the edge of the small bed in their apartment, watching Violet sleep. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the city outside. A single lamp cast a soft glow across the worn walls, touching the edges of a life built carefully, piece by piece, out of survival. Violet slept peacefully, one arm wrapped around her old stuffed toy, her breathing steady and soft. Safe. That was all Sarah had ever wanted. Just safe. But tonight, something inside her felt unsettled. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper. She leaned back slightly, her eyes lingering on her daughter's face. "You were happy today," she whispered softly, brushing a strand of hair away from Violet's forehead. Violet stirred just a little, but didn't wake. Sarah's chest tightened. Because happiness, in their world, was usually small, short, fragile. And today, it had felt bigger than usual. Stronger. More dangerous. Her mind drifted back to the mansion. To that room. To him. The way he had looked at Violet. The way his voice had changed. The way he had said her name. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting out a slow breath. No. She couldn't let herself think like that. People like him didn't change. Not really. Men with that kind of power, that kind of control. They didn't suddenly become warm. They didn't suddenly become safe. She had learned that the hard way. Different man. Different life. Same lesson. Don't trust what feels too good. Because it never lasts. Her fingers curled slightly into the fabric of her dress. "I won't make that mistake again," she whispered to herself. But even as she said it, her heart didn't fully believe her. Morning came too quickly. The light slipping through the thin curtains felt harsher than usual. Sarah moved through her routine quietly, carefully, helping Violet get ready, brushing her hair, fixing her dress. "You're quiet," Violet said, looking up at her. Sarah smiled faintly. "Just thinking." "About the big house?" Violet asked innocently. Sarah paused. "Maybe." Violet's eyes lit up. "I wanna go again." The excitement in her voice was pure, unfiltered, and it pulled at Sarah's heart in a way she wasn't ready for. "We're going for work," she said gently. "Not to play." "But he plays," Violet replied quickly. That stopped her. Sarah looked down at her. "What do you mean?" "He sits on the floor," Violet said, demonstrating with her hands. "And listens." Sarah felt something shift again. Small. But real. She didn't respond right away. Because she didn't know how to. The walk back to the mansion felt different that day. Not heavier, but more uncertain. Like stepping into something she couldn't fully control anymore. When they reached the entrance, Sarah paused briefly before knocking. Her hand hovered for just a second. Then she knocked. The door opened quickly. And there he was. Already there. As if he had been expecting them. "Good morning," he said. His voice was calm, but warmer than before. "Good morning, sir," Sarah replied. Violet peeked from behind her again. But this time, she didn't hide completely. She looked at him. Curious. Comfortable. "Hi," she said softly. And for the first time, he smiled. Not fully. Not broadly. But enough that it changed his entire face. "Good morning, Violet." The way he said it felt natural now. Like it belonged. Sarah noticed everything. Every detail. Every shift. And it made her uneasy. Because this wasn't part of the plan. There was never supposed to be a plan. Just work. Just survival. Nothing more. They stepped inside. The house felt different again. Still quiet. But no longer distant. Like something invisible had softened overnight. "I cleared some space," Richard said casually, as if it were nothing. Sarah frowned slightly. "For what?" He gestured toward the study. "For her." Sarah's breath caught slightly. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he replied simply. That answer stayed between them. Heavy. Honest. Violet looked up at Sarah. "Can I?" Sarah hesitated. Her instincts still whispered caution. But something else, something quieter, was beginning to speak too. "Stay where I can see you," she said finally. Violet nodded quickly and walked toward the study, her small steps filled with excitement. Sarah watched her go. Every step. Every movement. Then slowly, she turned back to him. "You don't have to change things for us," she said quietly. His gaze didn't waver. "I'm not doing it for you." That stung more than she expected. But before she could react, he added softly, "I'm doing it because I want to." That softened it again, and confused her even more. She looked away slightly, focusing on something else, anything else. "This isn't how it usually works," she said after a moment. "What isn't?" "This," she gestured lightly around them. "People like me, we don't become part of places like this." His expression shifted. Not defensive. Not dismissive. Thoughtful. "Maybe that's the problem," he said quietly. Her eyes flicked back to his. And for a second, neither of them spoke. Because the distance between them was no longer as clear as it used to be. And that scared her more than anything. From inside the study, Violet's soft voice echoed faintly. "Look, I made something." Sarah turned instinctively, then looked back at him. "I should go," she said. But her voice lacked certainty now. Like part of her, didn't want to move away from this moment. He nodded slightly, but didn't step aside. Didn't break the space between them. Sarah. Her name. Again. Different this time. Not formal. Not distant. Just real. She looked at him. And waited. Because something in his tone told her. This wasn't just another passing moment. And whatever he was about to say might change everything. Again. She didn't answer right away. There was something in the way he said her name. Steady, deliberate, like he had been thinking about it before she even walked in. "Yes, sir," she said softly, though the word sir didn't carry the same distance it once did. He held her gaze for a moment, as if deciding how much of himself he was willing to reveal. Then he spoke. "You don't have to be afraid here." The words landed gently, but they shook something deep inside her. Because fear wasn't something she could just turn off. It had lived with her for too long, shaped her decisions, controlled her steps. She gave a small, careful nod, but her eyes didn't fully agree. "I'm not afraid," she said quietly. He didn't argue, but he didn't believe it either. "I used to think control was the same as safety," he continued, his voice calm, reflective. "That if everything stayed exactly where I put it, nothing could go wrong." Sarah listened, her hands loosely clasped in front of her. "But it doesn't work like that," he added. A pause. "People aren't things." That sentence lingered. Simple, but heavy, because she understood it from the other side. She had spent years being treated like something that could be moved, replaced, overlooked. "I know," she said softly. He looked at her again. Really looked. "And yet you still act like you have to earn the right to exist here." Her breath caught slightly. That one hit too close. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, her tone controlled, but quieter now. "No," he said. "Not harsh. Not loud. Just certain. You're surviving." Silence followed. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Because he saw it. All of it. The exhaustion. The pressure. The quiet strength it took just to keep going. Sarah looked away first, her eyes drifting toward the floor. "I don't expect anything more than that," she said. "And I don't need anything more." But even as the words left her lips, they didn't sound fully true. From the study, Violet's laughter echoed softly. Bright. Free. It cut through the tension like light through glass. Both of them turned slightly toward the sound. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, because that laughter meant something to both of them. "She's happy here," he said quietly. Sarah nodded. Yes. There was no hesitation in that answer, because it was undeniable, and that truth complicated everything. "She deserves that," he added. Sarah's throat tightened slightly. "She deserves more than I can give her," she admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. It wasn't self-pity. It was honesty. The kind that came from years of knowing exactly what you couldn't provide. He turned back to her slowly. "And what do you think that is?" She hesitated, then answered carefully. "Space, comfort, security." Her voice softened even more. "A life where she doesn't have to stay quiet in corners while I work." That one lingered, because it carried guilt, and love, and sacrifice, all at once. He listened without interrupting, then spoke. "She won't have to do that here." Sarah's eyes lifted again, searching his face. "That's not how this works," she said gently. "There are lines, boundaries." "Who decides those?" he asked. She frowned slightly. "That's not something I get to question." "Maybe you should." That caught her off guard. A small shake of her head followed instinctively. "No, people like me don't get to rewrite rules like that." His expression didn't change much, but something behind it did. "And people like me created those rules." That sentence shifted the air between them again, because it wasn't said with pride. It was said with awareness, and maybe regret. Sarah studied him for a moment, trying to understand, trying to decide if this was real, or just something temporary. "You're not going to change the way the world works," she said quietly. "I'm not trying to change the world," he replied. A pause. "Just this house." Her chest tightened slightly, because that felt personal. Too personal. Before she could respond, Violet came running out of the study, holding up a piece of paper. "Look," she said excitedly. Sarah knelt down immediately. What did you make? A house, Violet said proudly, handing it to her. Sarah looked at the drawing. 3 figures, standing side by side, holding hands. Her fingers froze for just a second, because she understood what Violet saw, even if she didn't say it out loud. Richard stepped closer, glancing at the paper. His eyes lingered on it longer than expected. Then slowly, something softened in his expression again. "It's a good house," he said quietly. Violet beamed. "It's ours." That word hung in the air. Ours. Sarah felt it hit her chest like a wave. Too strong. Too fast. She quickly placed a hand on Violet's shoulder. "Sweetheart." But she didn't finish the sentence. Because she didn't know how. Didn't know how to explain something that even she didn't fully understand yet. Richard didn't correct her. Didn't step back. Didn't distance himself. He just stood there, looking at that drawing, as if it meant more than anything else in the room. And that was what scared Sarah the most. Because this wasn't just kindness anymore. It wasn't just a moment. It was becoming something deeper. Something real. And real things had consequences. She stood up slowly, her hand still resting protectively on Violet. "We should focus on work," she said, her voice steady, but quieter now. Trying to bring things back. Trying to restore the balance. But it didn't feel the same anymore. Not for her. Not for him. And definitely not for the little girl standing between them. Richard gave a small nod. But his eyes didn't leave the drawing. Or the meaning behind it. And as Sarah turned slightly, guiding Violet back toward the kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had already changed too much to go back. And the next step was going to ask more from her than she was ready to give. Sarah guided Violet back into the kitchen, but her hands weren't steady anymore. That simple drawing, 3 figures holding hands, it stayed in her mind like something she couldn't ignore. Like a truth she wasn't ready to face. "Mommy, are you okay?" Violet asked softly, tugging at her hand. Sarah forced a small smile. "I'm okay, baby." But inside, everything felt uncertain. Because for the first time in years, life wasn't just about surviving. It was asking her to feel again. To trust. And trust had cost her too much before. The day moved forward, but it didn't feel like a normal day anymore. There was a quiet awareness between them now. Every glance, every word, carried weight. By late afternoon, the house had grown softer in a way she couldn't explain. Sunlight filled the space. Violet's laughter echoed more freely. And Richard wasn't hidden behind closed doors anymore. He was present. Not as a distant employer, but as someone trying to understand something he had lost long ago. As Sarah finished her work, she felt it building inside her. That tension. That question she couldn't silence anymore. When she finally turned to leave, she didn't rush this time. She paused, looked at him, and spoke. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't defensive. It was honest. And vulnerable. Richard didn't answer immediately. He stood there, taking in the question, as if it deserved more than a simple response. Then he stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything that matters," he said quietly. Sarah's breath caught. He continued, his voice steady but softer than she had ever heard it. "I spent my life building walls, thinking they would protect me, thinking if I controlled everything, I wouldn't feel that loss again." His eyes shifted briefly toward Violet. "But all I did was build a life with no one in it." The truth in his voice wasn't something she could ignore. "I didn't even realize how empty it was until she walked into that room. Sarah felt her chest tighten, because she understood that kind of emptiness. Different life. Same loneliness. "I'm not trying to take anything from you," he added. "And I'm not offering you something out of pity." His gaze met hers again. "I'm offering you a place where you don't have to fight every second just to breathe." Silence followed. Heavy. Real. Sarah's heart was racing now. Because this wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about choice. About risk. About opening a door she had kept closed for years. "I don't know how to trust that," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "That things like this don't disappear." Richard didn't look away. "They might," he said honestly. "And that's what makes them worth holding onto." That answer surprised her. Because it wasn't a promise. It wasn't perfection. It was real. And real was something she could understand. Violet ran back toward them then, holding her drawing again. "Look, I made us again," she said, smiling brightly. Sarah looked down at it. 3 figures. Closer this time. Stronger lines. As if even the drawing was becoming more certain. Richard knelt slightly beside her. "Who's this?" he asked gently, pointing at one figure. "That's Mommy. And this? That's me." He paused for just a second before pointing at the third. "And this one?" Violet looked at him like the answer was obvious. "That's you." The simplicity of it. The innocence. It broke something open inside both of them. Sarah felt tears rise in her eyes. Because her daughter had already accepted something she was still afraid to name. And in that moment, she realized something she had been running from. Her whole life, she had been trying to protect Violet from the world. But maybe, just maybe, she had also been protecting herself from the possibility of something good. From the possibility that not everyone leaves. That not every door closes. That sometimes someone stays. She looked at Richard again. And this time, she didn't see distance, or power, or fear. She saw a man who had been just as broken, just as alone, trying to find something real again. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "I don't have much to give." He shook his head slightly. "That's not true." She held his gaze. "All I have is her." A small pause. "And my faith that things can be better." That was her truth. Her strength. Her risk. And he understood it. "Then that's enough," he said. And in that moment, something settled between them. Not perfect. Not certain. But real. Time moved forward. Days turned into weeks. And slowly, the house changed. Not in structure, but in feeling. It wasn't silent anymore. It breathed. Violet's laughter filled the halls. Sarah's presence no longer felt hidden. And Richard wasn't alone in his own world anymore. They didn't rush anything. They didn't force it. They simply allowed it to grow. Moment by moment. Choice by choice. Until one evening, as they sat quietly together, watching Violet draw on the floor, Sarah realized something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from having everything, but the kind that comes from finally not being alone. She glanced at Richard, and he looked back at her. No words needed, because they both understood. The emotional peak of their journey had never been about wealth or status. It had been about finding someone who sees you when the world doesn't. About choosing to stay when it's easier to walk away. About believing, even when life has given you every reason not to. And as Violet laughed softly between them, Sarah held on to one simple truth in her heart. Sometimes the place you fear the most becomes the place that saves you. And sometimes, love doesn't arrive with promises. It arrives quietly and changes everything. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?